Let me ask you something. When was the last time you stuck with something you were genuinely terrible at? Not just uncomfortable, actually bad. Fumbling, failing, getting it wrong over and over again. Most of us don't hang around in that zone very long. We get frustrated, we back off. We tell ourselves it's not for us. But what if I told you that the frustration isn't the obstacle? What if the frustration is literally the signal your brain uses to rewire itself? Because that's exactly what's happening. And once you understand why, you'll never look at failure the same way again. Today we're going inside the mechanics of how movement, balance, and yes, making consistent errors unlock your brain's most powerful learning states. And I'm not just talking about learning to shoot free throws or play an instrument. I'm talking about a biological mechanism that, once triggered, puts your entire brain into an elevated state for learning anything. Language, emotional regulation, cognitive skills, you name it. The access point happens to run through your body, and most people have no idea. Let's start with something that sounds obvious, but isn't. Does the brain control behavior? Sure, yes, of course. But the more interesting question is whether behavior can reach back and reshape the brain. And the answer is yes, with a very important condition attached. The behavior has to be meaningfully different from what you already know how to do well. That qualifier is everything. Think about it this way. Your nervous system has spent years building extremely reliable pathways for the things you do regularly. Making coffee in the morning, navigating your commute, typing on a keyboard. All of those are largely automatic at this point. They're handled by circuits deep below your conscious control. Your motor cortex, the part of your brain responsible for deliberate, precise movement, originally built those pathways, but now it's handed them off. Those behaviors don't generate plasticity because there's no error signal. The brain sees no reason to change what's already working. Plasticity gets triggered by a completely different experience, which is the experience of reaching for something your brain expects to be somewhere, and it isn't there, or moving in a direction your body anticipates, and your balance shifts unexpectedly, or trying to produce a sound, a word, a movement pattern, and falling short. These mismatches between what the nervous system predicts and what actually happens are not failures. They are requests. The brain is reading those errors as a direct instruction. Something in this circuit needs to be updated. This idea was demonstrated beautifully by neuroscientist Eric Knudsen at Stanford, whose lab spent years studying how the brain's maps of sensory space, where sounds are coming from, where visual objects appear, how the body should move to reach a target, can be shifted and recalibrated. In one classic experimental design, subjects were fitted with prism glasses that displaced the visual field, making objects appear far to the right when they were actually straight ahead. When people tried to reach for objects, they consistently missed because their visual map no longer matched reality. That mismatch, repeated again and again, is what drove the brain to begin recalibrating. Within days in younger subjects, the brain adjusted. The map shifted. Motor behavior caught up with the new visual reality. But here's what's critical. The plasticity wasn't triggered by wearing the glasses. It wasn't triggered by simply seeing a displaced world. It was triggered exclusively by reaching to the wrong place. The errors themselves were the signal. Remove the errors, say by just looking at the displaced world without ever trying to reach for anything, and the maps didn't shift. The brain was indifferent. Only the experience of trying, getting it wrong, and trying again activated the underlying neurochemistry for change. What does that neurochemistry actually look like? When you make a genuine error, not a careless mistake, but an earnest attempt that falls short, your brain releases a cascade of chemicals. Epinephrine jumps first, which is your alertness molecule. It tells the brain that something unusual is happening and it needs to pay attention. Acetylcholine follows, sharpening the focus of your attention to the specific neural circuits that are active right now. And then, as you start to get even a tiny bit closer to the target behavior, as you approximate the right answer even slightly, dopamine enters the picture. Dopamine plays a key role in reward learning mechanisms and the modulation of synaptic plasticity through multiple pathways, supporting both long-term potentiation and long-term depression of neural connections. PubMed Central. That combination is what physically marks your synapses for change. It essentially places a neurochemical flag on those specific connections and says, Restructure these during sleep tonight. This is why walking away from something the moment you get frustrated is arguably the worst thing you can do for learning. The frustration is not a sign that you're wasting your time. It's the sign that epinephrine and acetylcholine are elevated, that the relevant circuits are activated, and that you are exactly one step away from triggering the dopamine response that accelerates the whole process. Quitting at that moment is like leaving a marathon at mile 25. The neurochemical setup is already done. You just need to stay with it a little longer. How much longer? For adults, the research points toward focused error-making sessions somewhere between 7 and 30 minutes as the most productive window within a single learning bout. Not 3 hours of grinding, not an all-day marathon of deliberate practice. A relatively short, intensely focused period where you're genuinely attempting to do something you can't yet do reliably and making errors in the process. After that window, the neurons that need to change have been identified. The rest is sleep. One of the most important findings from Knudson's lab was about scale. Adults can absolutely get significant neuroplasticity, but they need smaller increments. When the prism glasses shifted the visual world by a large amount all at once, adult subjects struggled to adapt. When the shift was introduced gradually, a little at a time, the adult nervous system could track and adjust. The plasticity was real and substantial. It just required a more incremental path. This maps directly onto how you should structure learning as an adult. Smaller, well-defined targets. One aspect of a skill at a time. Short bouts of deep focus, separated by genuine rest, repeated over days and weeks. That's the architecture of adult neuroplasticity. Now there's a second factor that dramatically amplifies how fast all of this happens, and that's the stakes. In a series of follow-up experiments, the Knudson lab found that when subjects actually needed to successfully reach a displaced food source in order to eat, not just for a score, but for an actual meal, the rate of plasticity in adults accelerated dramatically. It started to resemble the rapid, robust plasticity seen in younger subjects. The brain's capacity for change hadn't disappeared. It was just gated behind a sense of genuine necessity. When the contingency is real, when something you care about deeply actually depends on whether you learn this thing or not, the brain releases these neurochemicals faster, in higher quantities, and for longer. The ceiling on adult plasticity is much higher than most people assume. It mostly just requires higher stakes. This brings us to the part of today's episode that I find most genuinely interesting, and that's the role of your balance system in all of this. Tucked inside your inner ear are tiny fluid-filled canals that track every shift in your orientation relative to gravity, forward and back, side to side, tilting and rotating. This vestibular system is one of the oldest and most conserved systems in your nervous system, and it has something very unusual, a direct hardwired connection to the deep brain centers that release dopamine, epinephrine, and acetylcholine, the same chemicals that gate neuroplasticity. The reason is evolutionary. Your ability to know where your body is in space and to correct errors in your orientation relative to gravity was a survival-critical function. Getting it wrong meant falling, missing a target, moving in the wrong direction when something was chasing you. So the brain built a very privileged circuit. Whenever the vestibular system detects an unexpected mismatch, a shift in balance, a novel orientation relative to gravity, it almost automatically triggers the release of those plasticity-gating neurochemicals. Research has confirmed that balance training in healthy adults improved not only balance performance, but also associative memory and spatial cognition, with increased cortical thickness in regions associated with visual and vestibular self-motion perception. Science Direct. And in a 2024 study published in Communications Biology, vestibular perceptual learning improved not just balance but also actual posture and gait parameters in older adults aged 70 to 88, suggesting that this system retains plasticity well into very late life. Nature. What this means practically is that engaging your balance system in novel ways, before or alongside other learning activities, can essentially prime your brain's neurochemical environment for enhanced learning across the board. Not just balance-related learning. Everything. The chemicals don't know what you're about to study. They just know the brain is in an error detection, high-stakes, recalibration mode, and they flood the system accordingly. The key word here is novelty. If you're already an experienced yogi, going through your regular flow practice is not generating vestibular errors. Your nervous system has already mapped those movements. If you've been running the same trail for 3 years, that's not creating meaningful gravity relationship disruption. The relevant signal is unfamiliarity. It's the experience of your body doing something in relationship to gravity that it hasn't fully mapped yet. Trying to balance on one leg while standing on an unstable surface, attempting a new swimming stroke, learning to skateboard for the first time. Even something as simple as standing on a foam pad with your eyes closed and noticing that your body has to work much harder than you expected. The point isn't danger. It isn't doing handstands on a rooftop. It's finding the edge of what your balance system has fully automated and introducing just enough novelty that the error signals begin firing. That's the unlock. That's what opens the door. There's also a practical state management piece to this that often gets overlooked. The optimal learning state, what actually allows you to make productive errors and stay with the process, is best described as calm alertness. Not too wired, not too fatigued. A moderate level of arousal where your attention is sharp, but your muscles aren't tense and your thinking isn't scattered. If you show up to a learning bout in a state of anxiety or overwhelm, you're too high. You'll be making errors, but you'll be making them from a defensive, reactive place that doesn't create the right neurochemical cocktail. If you're exhausted and barely keeping your eyes open, you're too low. The epinephrine needed to gate plasticity simply isn't there. Getting yourself to the starting line is its own skill. On the high alert side, a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long exhale through the mouth, sometimes called a physiological sigh, has well-documented evidence for rapidly reducing activation in the nervous system. It offloads carbon dioxide from the lungs in a way that almost immediately quiets the stress response. On the low-energy side, a burst of more vigorous breathing, a short walk, or even a few minutes of a genuinely challenging balance task can raise your arousal level to where it needs to be. Either way, you're not just waiting for the right state to show up. You're engineering it. Here's how this all comes together in a practical way. Before any learning bout, studying a new language, rehearsing a skill, working through a difficult concept, spend 5 to 10 minutes doing something that genuinely challenges your balance system. Not something you're good at, something slightly uncomfortable in terms of your relationship to gravity. Then move directly into your learning, keeping the session focused and relatively short, aiming specifically for the zone where you're making errors. Don't rush past that zone. Sit in it. Stay curious about what exactly isn't working yet. And when you hit the wall of frustration, rather than backing away, just notice that the frustration is chemical data. It means the right circuits are active and the conditions for change are in place. That's when you lean in for just a little longer. One more thing I want to emphasize because it changes everything about how most people approach self-improvement. How badly you need to learn something genuinely determines how fast you'll learn it. This isn't motivational language. It's biology. The brain does not issue plasticity equally across all endeavors. It prioritizes the ones that feel most crucial. So if you're trying to build a new skill for a reason that feels optional, your brain will treat it as optional. If you can find, or create, a genuine reason why this matters, why not acquiring it has real consequences, you shift into a neurochemical territory that dramatically accelerates the whole process. This is your challenge for this week. Pick one skill you've been putting off because it feels hard. Spend 5 minutes doing a balance or movement activity that's genuinely unfamiliar to you. Then go directly into 10 to 20 minutes of focused practice on that skill, accepting the errors as the mechanism, not as the problem. Do that 3 times over the next 7 days and pay attention to what shifts. And here's what I want you to do right now, before you close this video. Comment below with the skill you're committing to this week. The act of writing it publicly creates a small but real contingency. Your brain notices that. Use it. I read every single comment on this channel, and I genuinely want to know what you're working on. Growth is not accidental, it's intentional. If you're ready to build a better version of yourself, welcome. Stay tuned.